Welcome to episode 28 of the Ready for More podcast.
So there's a real magic, I think, in not knowing if you're willing to go on the adventure and the experiments and the ways of actually discovering what's there for you.
Welcome to the Ready for More podcast, where we share success strategies and stories for women business owners, entrepreneurs who are ready for more for yourself and for your business. I'm your host, Heather Cameron, and I'm here to help you to discover your unique path to profitability and success so you can achieve your more on your own terms. Are you ready for more? You can find today's show notes and links at www.igniteyourmarket.com/readyformore. Welcome to the Ready for More podcast. My guest today is Lisa Murray. Lisa is the founder of Create Alchemy, a thriving international business which invites you to nurture your ideas into life with ease and get off the merry-go-round of shoulds. An MBA qualified business and creative coach, Lisa's vision is to make living in a playful, satisfying adventure rather than a predictable daily grind. Lisa is the author of Stop Waiting, Start Creating, and Live Beyond Burnout. Those are two separate books. She inspires entrepreneurs, change leaders, and creatives to embrace the blossoming of their vision in creating greater futures. So welcome, Lisa. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast.
Hi, Heather. I'm so happy to be here.
Lisa's she's in Australia and I'm in Ottawa, Canada, and she's dying of heat and we're having a blizzard. So it's all the fun part of being able to do a podcast and bring people from all over the world into each other's world, which is kind of cool. Although I'm envying her lovely sunshine at the moment. That was your bio. Can you tell us a bit more about your current business and what you're doing and what your expertise lies?
Yeah, sure. Look, my current business is always changing. That's the first thing I want to say. I'm very multi-creative. And, I've had this business under various guises for about 10 years now. And every now and then I rebrand it because it's like the energy has shifted so much. And so Creative Alchemy, I think, is a name that I can last with for a while because it literally includes a whole diversity of things. So where will I even start? So I have two books. Maybe that's the easy place to start. So I've written two books so far, and I do love to write. And the first one is called Stop Waiting, Start Creating. And that's for all the people who've got too many ideas, or they're procrastinating all the time, or they're not confident of putting their ideas into the world. It's kind of all of those kinds of things. And I don't do much with that book, but it is there for the people that need it. And then there's Living Beyond Burnout was my second book. And that came because I had, really severe burnout. And I realized that the normal ways of treating burnout were not working for me at all. And so I literally ended up working out my own ways and writing a book about that. So those two things just trundle along by themselves. They're really good. And then there's all the other fun things. So I really love co-creating with people. And so what I run once a year is a writing retreat online where people come along and they bring whatever their writing is. So it can be journal writing. It can be a very personal sort of introspective kind of thing. It can be writing a book. It can be writing their website or, even an ad or a blog post. And so they bring their writing for 8 weeks and we write together. And that's very amazing, actually. I'm always astonished at the transformations that come from that because I have a great capacity to tap into the exact thing that's stopping someone from writing or creating and then turning it around for them so that they can pretty much start straight away. And it just always surprises me what people ask and what I come out with and how it works. So that's one of my most fun things that I do.
That's amazing. That's always good because I think we have to write, and we write as business people, but generally as people we tend to write a lot, and and we're not necessarily intentional about our writing.
Look, it's so true. And, some people just come back every time because they're like, and sometimes they're really good writers, but they're coming back because there's an energy that gets created when we all write together, and it's funny, a couple of days ago, last week it probably was now actually, people were painting in that session. A whole lot of them just decided that spontaneously that they would paint instead. And it was marvelous though, because it actually brought something new to it. And so I'm very flexible in the way I coach and facilitate people because I believe that people innately know what they need to know. And all I am is the catalyst. I'm just the person who brings something to the surface and maybe puts a different perspective on it. So
Awesome.
that brings me, probably to the next thing, which is Glow Wild, which is a new program that starts in a couple of weeks, but it is very much an accumulation, I think, of things that I see in the world and things that I've worked on over many years that I can see people need. And it's about really having such a strong sense of yourself that everything is possible.
Mm.
And so I'm really looking forward to running that as well. And, I could keep going on and on and on. There's a whole lot of things. Like, literally, I have just so much that goes on. But I also run live events, mostly in Europe, funnily enough. I don't do so much in Australia for that. But I run live events around creating your future, because I think a lot of people don't have a sense of what that really looks like. And it's also a way of tapping into what's available, rather than, the crazy wish list that isn't really relevant to anything. So many things, really. So,
but it's it's awesome, and it fits into really what the point of this podcast is, which is Ready for More, right? It's about women entrepreneurs. It's about women who have stepped into their, 40 plus is the audience that I generally lead towards, but it's women who have stepped into that sense of, I want something for myself. I want something that's me, and I want to be creative, and I want to offer and change the world, and I want to level up. I want more, and I want more, but I'm not always sure how to get there. I'm not always sure. And there's so many things. You use the word should. I use the word should all the time. We're being shoulded to death about, I was on a call just before I came on here, and it was a marketing call, and there's that you should do this and you should do that. And to me, you have to listen to all that, but it's not should. You have to change should to want, and you have to decide what fits you. And, it's great to have all the information, but you have to be able to weed it out. Yeah. So it's a very, your energy and your sense of creativity and opening people up. I just think women, I heard this the other day, is that women over 40, it was written by Jan Arden. Jan Arden is a singer in Canada. You probably have heard some of her songs. She sings Insensitive is one song that people went worldwide. And she's mid-50s. Her mother just passed away. And she just did this amazing blog post, Facebook post about, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, women were slowing down in our 50s. And she goes, I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready to do that. I'm ready to take the world by storm. She had been similar to my journey. She'd been a caregiver for a long time. I'm ready to take the world by storm. And I think that's a new mindset for women. And that really excites me and empowers my ideas of where I want to go.
I think it's so true what you're saying. And because I am 51 and I'm literally like, okay, I'm ready to go now. Nothing and no one gets in my way. And it's been, I think, 10 years of moving towards that. And this is probably one thing I do want to say in this thing. Of course, we want more, but we have to allow it to come in the ways it can come. Because a lot of people, think that when people are doing well, they have an overnight success. But what I can see is I have circled around topics for years, and then all of a sudden they're ready to be there in the world as part of what I'm teaching, and I think that this thing of the more, we've been taught not to want more, not to ask more, to settle, basically. And I just think there's so much in not settling. I talked to someone a little while back about money, and she said to me, you don't have a money mindset problem. Because I've always thought I didn't have a money mindset problem, but I was like, I like more money, And she said to me, you have a settling for less problem. And talk about, being slapped in the face with a wet fish. I was just like, oh my gosh, I do. And it's been so interesting. That was maybe 6 months ago. And so much has changed in that time as I've looked at all the ways that I've been settling for less. So I think your topic is so timely and so important.
And that what you just said is very thought-provoking. I'm thinking, I might actually resonate a little bit with that. But it is, one of the things I find a lot with women entrepreneurs, and I've coached many who will say that, oh, my business is making money. I'm like, are you paying yourself? Well, no. Well, then your business isn't making money. And so there's so much passion around their topic that they forget that they deserve to make a living, to be more than make a living with their business. They shouldn't be doing it for free. Then it's a charity, not a business, and they deserve to make money, and they deserve to be paid for their expertise, their wisdom, their art, their creativity, or whatever it may be. They deserve that. And that's something I find a lot of times getting people to accept that they deserve that is part of it too.
Yeah. I think I've made a business out of being paid to be creative.
Which is
Like,
awesome.
yeah. But it was very deliberate, because when I had the burnout, one of the things was that I came to that was probably the first thing I came to. Like, well, people always talked about self-care, but self-care wasn't it wasn't making virtually any difference to me. And so I looked at, well, what else do I need to add in here? And the creativity was a big part of that. And I remember in the very early days writing down, and I found it years later, writing down what would it take to get paid for writing? Because I didn't know I was a good writer. I just knew that I needed to write and that, it would be great if someone paid me for it. And literally within about 2 years, there was a company that paid me for years to write for them. And ultimately it was pretty much my choice that I stopped. And they paid me to write to the energy of things, which was absolutely marvelous, because I had a lot of creative freedom in that. And I still have clients that pay me for that. They're just different clients now, and I do it for the pleasure of it as much as for the getting paid. So I think there's something really important in asking for what you truly want, because that was something that I really, truly desired, was to get paid for that. And now my thing is painting. My next little experiment with this is going to be painting, because I'm like, I wouldn't call myself an artist right now, but I love to paint. It makes me happy. And I'm like, well, can I get paid for being happy? That would be really good.
I wish that sounds awesome to me.
Well, I think it's possible.
It's interesting too.
It's possible.
I get I'm not an artist. I draw. And I've been drawing for 5 or 6 years, more than that, probably 8 or 10 years. And I've done portraits for gifts and things like that, but I have never sold any. But I have gone through the effort in the last little while to draw every day. Like every time my dog goes outside, we were talking, we have dogs. Every time my dog goes outside, it's right beside my art desk, and I draw something while she's outside. And it's really helping me to get connected with. There was a book, and I think it's called 15 Minutes of Art Before Breakfast, I think is the name of it, something like that. And the book was so-so, but the concept I loved, of just drawing every day. It doesn't have to be good. It's that effort of getting that creativity, whatever it is that you like to do. But to draw every day really is an interesting shift in perspective for me. Because it just brings, I'm not good at some of what I'm doing, definitely. I drew a baby and it looked like an old man, but that's okay, because at least I'm exercising that art of doing that and using that part of my brain. So
yeah,
I get that. It's creativity is fun. You shared a little bit about your background, but what led you to where you are now, to taking and being an entrepreneur and doing that? You said burnout. What led you to that?
Led to the burnout? Overwork, addiction to work.
Led you to go out on your own and to take that.
Well, really the burnout did, because I got to a point where I couldn't speak coherently. I couldn't sit up for more than 3 hours a day. I couldn't actually go to work. And so then, I quit my job and I looked at, well, what am I going to do with my life? Because I knew I was in the wrong place. And see, one of the things about burnout that I think, and a lot of illness actually, is that we get those things when we have an unhappy soul, when basically we're not on the right path for who we are, what we can become. And so for me, I started to look at, well, who am I? And what would I like to bring to the world? And because it took quite a long time for me for the physical recovery, like a year later, I still had like constant pain in my body, basically. And so I went to a life direction psychic, because I was a bit like, okay, something's not going well here. And she was also a medical intuitive. And she basically said to me, you need to be creative and you need to be a business coach first up. Because I'm really good at business. Like, it's a natural capacity for me. And, my entire life, I was always the one they brought in when there was problems, or things to fix or things to generate. Like, I was always the one they brought in for the creative energies. And I didn't ever put that together, because I think, I'm very, aware, but sensitive with that. And so because I was so highly sensitive, I didn't really realize I was aware. And so I didn't realize I was good at anything. And I know that sounds ridiculous. Like, when I look at it now, I'm like, that's crazy. But I literally didn't realize what I was good at. And so I'm really grateful to this woman, because she basically gave me a list of what I was good at. And she said, go and explore those things. Because most of those things, I was not doing them. Like, I wasn't writing. I was envying other writers, but I wasn't writing.
But you said a few things there. It's like, I think women don't actually learn to know what we're good at.
No.
Right. I don't think I had a very successful career in corporate world to the point where they sent me, as we were talking before on the call, they sent me to Australia to work for 2 years. I was the top 5% of talent in our corporation. And then when I got laid off because the bubble burst, and it was like, I went through I don't know what I'm good at, and I'm very much a generalist. It's funny because what you said, I'm the person you bring in when there's an emergency because I can solve the problem solver.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see the different angles, and I'm a really good problem solver, and I don't get stressed in that moment. So I handle that stuff really well. But what does that translate into a job when you're, applying for jobs? So that moment from when I went from corporate to figuring out and then taking the entrepreneurial journey was, I don't know what I'm good at. I know I'm smart, but I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what to define these things that I'm good at. So I love that, because I think a lot of women do suffer knowing what they're good at and almost being apologetic.
Yeah.
They discover what they're good at.
I remember having a conversation with my uncle, and because I was going through a bit of a depressed stage in my business, because I was like, I don't know how to make this work in the way I know it can work, And I was talking to him because he's been entrepreneurial for a very long time and he's been very successful. And I just wanted to get inside someone's successful's head, And at the end, and we had a really great conversation. And at the end of it, he said to me, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, wow. And I thought, and I said to him, really what I'd like to do is write books and have them made into movies. And because that's really, really, when I looked at it, that's what I wanted to do. And the funny thing is, he looked at me in absolute horror. And he said, you can't do that. And I just looked at him and I'm like, you think? And I, really now, right? And it's been a few years since that conversation, but I would say I'm very much on the track of that right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we are often also told that our dreams are crazy, that our big visions aren't normal. They're not what you should want to do, And what I know is that the more away from reality I've moved, and I say that very happily, away from reality, because when you look out there, reality is not such a great looking thing, is it? And for me, I've really entrepreneurially created my own world and created I think things for people who are different, because what I see is, if you're different, there's so much of what the normal business advice is given that you don't know what to choose because it doesn't apply to you. And for me, I've found very much I've had to find my own path. And sometimes that's been incredibly frustrating, I've got to say. But there's this other part where I go, I'm so glad I did that, because it's given me such a resilience and such an awareness of energy and possibilities that I'm getting clearer and clearer about what I really love and what I would like to do. So there's a real magic, I think, in not knowing, if you're willing to go on the adventure and the experiments and the ways of actually discovering what's there for you.
I agree with you. One of I think it's the first or second or third episode I had in my podcast is a woman called Elaine, and she talked about that. We put all our efforts in and we get so connected with the outcome. And one of the things that she really talks about is just putting all your efforts into the creation, putting all the efforts into releasing what it is that you create, and allow the outcome. Don't get so fixated on the outcome that, even to the nth detail, you put something up on Facebook and nobody watches it. Well, that doesn't mean that they won't watch it a year from now, because it doesn't go away, right? Don't get so attached from the outcome. And I think that's a really interesting way, because then whatever you're doing may lead to something slightly different than what you anticipated. But if you're fixed on the outcome, then you can get really stuck. And I found that quite a good point and quite a good way of thinking.
It is. It truly is. And, I think so often when we get fixed on the outcome, we actually limit what the outcomes can be.
Exactly.
So I'm literally, with my creations, I'm like, so what can you be? What can you create in the world? Like, I've got the curiosity going full on now, because what I've noticed over and over again is, if I set that thing free in the world, it creates beyond what I can imagine.
I love your use of the word curiosity. I think that's a really important word for business women, is to be curious about and there's someone here locally who uses that word the first time it was introduced to me in a business concept. And I'm like, yeah, that's, to be curious about the outcome as opposed to be stressed about the outcome, and to be attached, to have that curiosity is, I think it's a powerful word for us to use more, is to
Yeah.
try, to be curious. I mean, you have to commit to what you try. That's one of the challenges, right? You can't just
Yeah.
do it once and think, oh, it didn't work out. You have to commit to the
Yeah.
process of trying these things. But to be curious about the outcome and to be curious about where it goes is quite a powerful word.
Yeah. I think too, there's something in not judging what comes or what doesn't come, and what I found really interesting is sometimes I would have clients come to me years after they saw me. And one woman, she said, do you remember talking at this particular event? And actually I did, because it was a small event and I went way out on a limb and talked about energy in ways I wouldn't normally, to a really like an audience I'd never met before, And I said, yeah, I said, I do. She said, I've wanted to work with you ever since that day. And it finally came like 5 years later that she could. And, on the surface, nothing came out of that at the time, right? I just went and did this talk to this group of business ladies. And then 5 years later, this came out. And so I think we're really quick to go, that didn't work, instead of going, what can this create in the world?
Absolutely. And I mean, what you said of being on a stage and probably being more authentically yourself in that kind of going off attracts people. We get attracted to authenticity. And I mean, I struggle sometimes my own self thinking, okay, what makes me different than the other thousands of business coaches out there, or thousands of coaches out there? And the coaching community has become very different than it was 10 years ago when I first started.
Oh, totally.
It's got a lot of people who don't give it a good name, and there's a lot of stuff, and it's almost become a bad word sometimes. I'm like, no, it's not. But what makes me different? And it's sometimes not easy to find. But I know I get the most traction when I'm the most authentically me.
Yeah, I think authenticity is a really big part of it, because don't even really advertise my coaching anymore because of all of the things you just described. I'm so horrified by the industry in general. But I think authenticity is a really huge thing, and not here's my vulnerable post. And it's funny, I'm writing a book about authenticity at the moment because there's so much that is said in the name of authenticity that is just not authentic. And I'm really, it is a buzzword. And I'm really just like, no, that's not what authenticity is, So I think there's a lot of these things where basically I think it comes back to an energetic process where who we are speaks louder than what we say. And I noticed this most, I love working with horses. I'm really quite obsessed and addicted to working with horses. And I went and did some work in Hawaii around leadership and horses, just having some sessions with a lady who had a herd of wild Mustangs. And, you can't pretend when you're with a horse. They will either allow you to be part of their herd or they won't. And it was extraordinary. I mean, just extraordinary what came from those 2 sessions that I had. And I'm going to go back later in, this year and have more, because I'm just so astonished by what transpired. And I think that, this is the place we have to be, where we really have just no barriers to what's there, and just allowing ourselves to be so present. And that's where the authenticity comes from.
Cool. My first guest on my podcast was Sophie Bennett, and she was an Olympic level, or not Olympic, but she was very much into horses as well, and she did that. And one of the things that she says in one of her books, she's written a couple books as well, is that she learned sales through being a dressage horse person, because she's always had to help work with the horse. She always had to sell the horse, and she always had to sell it to the judges and do everything else. So she learned that sales through horses, through working with them. So it's kind of neat that you bring that up as well, that there is that any animal, I think, teaches us a lot of things that we, as we exist and interact with them, because they have a very different, they don't make it as complex as we make everything.
No. Well, they don't have to look good on Instagram, even if they're only things they do, right?
Exactly. What would you say is the most important thing that you've learned on your journey?
Oh, wow. That's such a big question, isn't it? I think for me, it comes back to knowing that working harder is not the answer. Because when I look at it, I never got anywhere when I worked harder. And for a long time, I thought that was the answer to everything, hence the burnout. But literally what I've realized is whenever things aren't working, my best thing to do is to go and to play or to do art or to go to the beach or to play with the dog, whatever it might be, but to go and do something totally different. And sometimes for a week or two at a time, not just an hour, And I think sometimes people in the entrepreneurial world get horrified. They're like, but what about all your goals? And what about all your deadlines? And I'm like, well, actually, I achieve them supersonically fast when I've gone and had that time away,
Absolutely.
and when I'm rested and because you're creative in that space.
Well, and you're recharging your batteries and you're refocusing your brain and all of those things. Yes.
All of those things. Yeah. And so literally what I've come to is working hard is never the answer. And so for me, when I work 2 to 3 hours a day, everything flows. Everything is really easy. Everything gets done. If I work more than that, my body gets tired. It gets cranky that I'm at the computer and things stop flowing, actually. So I've learned that that's how it works for me. Now, it may not be the same for everyone in the amount of time. That's just how it works for me.
And you have to find out. I mean, it's funny because I asked a question on Facebook the other day of what do they love the most about being an entrepreneur? And the answer is the one word that was two that were consistent. One was flexibility and one was freedom. But having the ability to make their own schedules and do your own thing. And to me, I do a question every Tuesday. We're recording this on Tuesday.
Yeah.
My question today was when is your best energy? So when do you work the best? Because I know I am not very energetic between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Like for me, and I'm not a morning person. So why should I try? Because somebody tells me I should be up at 6 o'clock in the morning working. It's not my best energy. So trying to, I see so many people thinking they've got to work these really, really long days. And if your energy isn't there, I am so much better suited to go and have a coffee with somebody at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and use that part of being a business person and being energized by someone else than I am trying to force myself to do something at 3 in the afternoon.
Oh, totally. It's the flow, not force, right? It literally is what brings you into flow, what stops the force. Yeah.
And I think we need to get more in touch with that to really, because I think, and back to that audience of 40 plus is that this is an opportunity for us to sculpt, to create, to develop the lifestyle that we want. I know one of my inspirations, I often bring her up on the podcast, is a woman who's just kind of retired and she's 80 something. And she was doing a hands-on practitioner business. She was a client of mine for a while. And she had like 3 or 4 businesses and finally stopped working at, created her own, and didn't even look her age, but created her own thing and then sold her business and is now on a horse. We've got a lot of horse things in here, which is kind of funny because I'm highly allergic to horses, but she's on a horse. She's helping using her practitioner in a horse ranch in the other side of the country. But she's in her 80s. My dad worked until his body stopped functioning until he was 84. And he sculpted his life as he was always self-employed, but he sculpted it into a different type of business than what it would originally been. So I think there's lots of
I just think that is the beauty of living. I mean, we made work into something it never should have been. Talking of shoulds, we made it into something that takes over our lives. It was never meant to be that. It was meant to be something that would add something to our life.
Yes. And we've also made retirement into something that it shouldn't be either.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
So we're doing this job that's running and then we retire and we stop and we're no longer contributing and we're no longer doing those things. So, I said, I know many women, actually, some of them in their 60s and 70s, who are doing amazing things and their partner might be retired, but they're still doing what they're doing because they want to be engaged and they want to be creative and they want to contribute. And so that's my little pet peeve, because I think retirement it just has such a finality. You're done, go retire. You don't need to contribute.
Well, it's that energy of putting the horse out to pasture. If we keep going with the horses, right?
The horses are in.
And honestly, I mean, we're all amazing, capable beings, and you don't stop being that just because you finish working in a paid job. And I see so many people who are like, well, what do I do now? And this is part of what I love working with people is, well, what would you love to be and create in the world? What would actually give you pleasure? Because we're also taught not to do things for pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Anyway, we could talk about this bit for a long time
But
too, couldn't
there's a
we?
second part of that too, is what would you love to do? And then and you deserve to be paid for it if it's something that
Yeah,
you're contributing to other people. And that's where I find women sometimes falter that point. You deserve to be
yeah,
paid for. You deserve to have wealth in your life. You
yeah,
deserve to have that. And I can't remember
yeah.
what you said earlier about what your friend said, but that comment was very the scarcity or the
Oh, he said, you can't do that. It was my uncle. He was just like, you can't do that.
yeah.
And because he comes from that older paradigm. And, I totally get why he thought it wasn't possible, but I just wasn't willing to accept that as not being possible, because I
Absolutely.
know it's possible.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, something for all of us. Imagine a future where literally everyone in the world worked for 2 or 3 hours and there was enough for everybody. Like, wouldn't that be extraordinary?
It would be extraordinary. And I mean, work has, when you think 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we were working in more of less things where you could go to the grocery store and take it off the shelf, right?
Yeah.
We were working, we were contributing, we were, grandmothers were looking after the kids so that the kids, the mothers could, there was much more of a symbiotic relationship, and still is in many countries, right? You and I both live in countries where that's not the case, but in many countries, there's still a lot of that goes on. And sometimes I think some of the problems that we have are part of that first world component
Totally.
of trying to maintain this lifestyle that we've created. So
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. And I just think, there is enough for everyone, and let's find ways to make that achievable.
I agree. What surprised you the most as an entrepreneur?
I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. That's really interesting. What surprised me the most? How much, it actually follows on from what we're saying, how much I enjoy having time off. Like, because I really was addicted to work and I loved work. And now, but I've got all these other things and I'm like, oh, I love those too. And it's been really, I think there was about 3 or 4 years there where I was totally astonished that I loved these other things, because I really thought that pleasure came from work. And of course now I'm like, oh, there's so much more.
Yes, and work can be addictive. I mean, I was on that. I traveled a lot. I mean, I lived in Australia, but before that I had lived like 100,000 miles all the time. And that there's an addiction to being constantly on the go. There's an addiction. There's an adrenaline junkie to being, oh, I got to go catch a plane. I got to run. I got to go meet this new client. I've got to come. I got to go do that. I got to go. And there's this adrenaline junkie, and yet you burn out. Right. I'm sure I was burnt out many times where I didn't even really acknowledge it, because I went through stages of working 80 hours a week for months at end. And then I went through stages of traveling on a plane every single week. I think one time I went 16, 17 weeks doing flights from Canada to the States. And so it's not small treks. And even when I was in Australia, I would travel from Australia to Singapore on a Wednesday, meet with people in Singapore on the Wednesday, go from Singapore to Malaysia, meet with people in Malaysia on the Friday, and fly home overnight back to Australia. Like, when you think about it, it's crazy. And I was doing that constantly. There's an adrenaline component of it. So I love what you said, because it is surprising how many more awesome things they are and how less complicated they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Can I add one more for surprises?
Sure. Absolutely.
So I think the other thing that surprised me was that my work is better received overseas than it is in Australia.
Huh.
And that was, my first really major live event I created overseas. And it's always been like that for 6 or 7 years now. I get many more people to my live events overseas than I do in Australia. And I don't know why, but I'm happy to have it, because it means it's tax deductible travel. It's great.
We could have a really good aside conversation on that one, because having gone from a North American environment and moved and worked in Australia for 2 years, it was a real different mindset shift. It was a really different, it was a different working environment in a way I didn't anticipate or expect. And it was like, oh, at one point it's like, do I want to do this again? I was the only woman at the level that I was across all of Asia in our company. And so it's like I was fighting that glass ceiling again. I was fighting things I had fought a little bit here, but I was fighting it in a really different way down there. And it is a different environment. It is a different country, and it is a different environment. So I can understand that. In hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently?
I'm going to say yes and no. And it's funny because what always comes when people ask me this is being consistent and having a consistent income stream. And it's probably the thing that I still find incredibly difficult because I'm always evolving and I'm always becoming more, coming back to the more topic. And so to run the same thing over and over, I find almost impossible. But I have this, funnily enough, this year settled on something that may allow me to have the best of both. So I'm experimenting with a business model across the entire year to see if that will allow me to have the best of both. Because I find that I would go through phases where my cash flow was virtually zero, and then other times where it was awesome, and it was literally because I got tired of promoting and I didn't feel like launching another thing. And so there's that finding that balance, I think, is the thing that is really not an easy thing to do when you're multi-creative and when you're, clever in a lot of different areas and a lot of different people are asking for different things all the time. And I think the second part that goes with that is literally not saying yes to people just because it feels fun. Oh my gosh, I've said yes to so many things because, that would be so much fun. And then I've realized that I don't have the bandwidth to do all of it in the timing that people are asking for.
Yeah, and that's a very good piece of advice for people is I often hear it in a different way. So I like your different one of, because I often hear don't say yes to people who you really don't want to work with, but you say yes because you want the money, right? There's that chasing the dollar yes, but this is an interesting one. You're chasing the fun yes, which is it's a same issue in a different way, right? Which is you're chasing the fun yes, and you're trying to fit everything in. And yes, and you brought up, I think, a challenge for everyone. Challenge for me. The last 2 years of my life, I was a caregiver for my parents who have both passed away. So my cash flow went to nothing because I couldn't balance both. So finding consistent cash flow and adjusting is a challenge as an entrepreneur. No matter where you're at in your business, it can be a challenge when you have other things. Or I know when I used to do a lot of leadership development training. And the joy was creating the course, not delivering it. Like I remember creating one course, and after the third time I delivered, I'm like, this isn't as fun anymore. I love the creation. I love interacting with the people in the audience. And I was fortunate to go to Africa with this course and to go to Zambia three or four times to do it. But it got kind of boring to deliver it because the creation was done.
And that's the same for me. Totally. Yeah. So this is why I literally, for me, I have to come up with business models that take that into account. That's what I've discovered.
That's a lovely piece of insight. I might have to think about that one myself, because it is that sense of how do I create something that's valuable for the people participating, but still stimulates me and his energy. And because then I can bring, I always think of it as sitting forward in your seat energy, right? to what I do, as opposed to kind of sitting there and, but bringing that you're forward and engaged energy to what I do. So that's a very good thought. Thank you.
I think that energy you're talking about, that engaged energy is, for me, it's life-giving. It's energizing. And so if I don't have that, then I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble here. It's actually going to kill more than just my business.
Mine comes from two things, actually. That energy really comes when I'm crisis solving, because that can be one of my strengths, right? So when I'm in crisis solving or I'm working and I'm doing that, it's like, that energy is really there. And then I burn it afterwards, mind you, but that's it comes in that. But just being engaged and seeing what other people can do and being that kind of sit forward energy is great. So your expertise, how would you summarize your expertise? What would you say in this model that you're doing? If someone, and how does it relate to women in business and women who are doing that?
I think probably there's one thing that underpins everything, and that is my awareness. Like, you can ask me about anything and I can go to the energy of it and I can pinpoint what's going on and I can give you a way forward. And I find it astonishing. Sometimes the things that fall out of my mouth, I'm like, where did that come from? Because it wasn't something I cognitively would have thought of. But I've seen this over and over. And so I apply it in different ways, of course. So I apply it in just straight out one-on-one, breakthrough sessions for people who are stuck in whatever area they're stuck. It doesn't seem to really matter. I'll apply it in terms of writing, because writer's block for me is not a thing. I don't really believe it's true. People name a lot of other things writer's block.
Mm.
And what I've noticed when I talk with people is it's always something else. It's not actually writer's block. And so, yeah, just bringing that, through in a way that they can then keep writing. It works for people's businesses in terms of, like, I have one client who's a business coaching client who I've had for many years in a manufacturing industry. Now, that's not something I would ever have expected I would say yes to, but he uses me for my energetic awareness for how he works with his clients.
Mm.
And it's fascinating what we talk about, like stuff that you would never imagine you would talk about, And so I think that one thing underpins everything. And then there's this very pragmatic part that goes, I see patterns because I'm a little bit autistic or a lot autistic, whichever way you want to put it. And I literally see patterns in energy, in people's conversations, in the way they're creating. I can perceive all of that. And so when I connect that with what they're actually doing or not doing, the path of what they need to do becomes clear. So I do it in all sorts of different ways, and I do it on a personal level, on a business level, with writing, with creativity. I'm moving, I think, towards doing it with horses, lots of different things. I run retreats for women, like private retreats where I just have maybe 3 women and we go really deep into activating their awareness, because I don't actually believe I need to be the person they come to all the time either. So I do lots of different things, and it just is this thing of, I think if you ask me what's the underpinning thing, that's the underpinning thing. And there's so many other things that sit on top of that.
Excellent. It's very interesting. I kind of get the seeing patterns and seeing where things go and being able to extract. I'm not a linear thinker, and I've always found that to be quite powerful for me, because I once worked with this guy who, we had this wonderful relationship, and I was trying to solve a problem. I was technical. I was trying to solve a problem, and he kept leaving the room, and I'm like, where are you going? Because I can't watch you think. It was, and I was fairly young when he did this. I was in my early 20s, and he's like, I cannot watch you think. I'm like, okay. He goes, I know that you'll figure it out faster than I will. And I know that you'll come up with a solution. And I know that once you have it, you can explain it to me, but I can't watch you think. And it was a really kind of a huge aha moment, because it made me realize there's a power in how we each think. And then there's also a power in being able to translate that thinking to somebody else's language so they can understand it.
Totally. I remember the first time someone described how I think. I looked at them and my mouth was open, so far. I was like, you just described my brain. And this guy said, yeah, you're a high functioning autistic. I said, what? But it explains so much in my life. So much. I use both brains all the time together.
I'm dyslexic, so I use both brains.
Yeah, of course. Exactly. Yeah. And so basically and that's when you're saying you don't really know what you bring that's different. That's one of the things you bring that's different, because not everyone can do that. And not everyone can then make it linear enough for the other people to follow.
Yes, that I'm very good at. I know that. And that is part of, having learned more about dyslexia as time goes on, we actually have more things firing back and forth between our brains than other people have. I'm also left-handed, so that adds to the whole thing. But
all of it. Yeah,
all of
totally.
It, so that's fascinating. How can my listeners learn more about you? How can they find out more about what you're doing, where you're going? Where can they get more of your energy?
If they go to Creative Alchemy with an I on the end, not a Y.com, everything will be there by the time this show is live. I'm about to do a new website, and I'm going to make it so simple. And so everything will be on one page there. And Excellent. So they can just go and have a little adventure there and find out all sorts of things.
Oh, that's wonderful, because I think there's some fascinating things that will intrigue people to delve into and do that. So we're coming close to our end. And I always end with 3 questions. And one of them is, the first one is, what is your superpower?
Awareness.
Excellent. Do you have a favorite quote?
Not one I can think of right now. That's so funny, because normally I go yes and I rattle it off, and my mind literally went blank. But I think what I would go with right now is literally, your choice creates awareness. Because a lot of people think their awareness creates the choice, that they have to be aware before they can choose. It actually works the other way around.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And the last one is, what's the most important message you'd like to leave our listeners to take away for women who are entrepreneurs, who are in their 40s and 50s, who want more?
Yeah. My sense is, it really is finding the joy. And literally, that comes from trusting yourself and knowing that every single choice you make makes a difference somehow. And when you actually put those two things together and start to trust your choices, the joy has to come. It has to be there.
I love that. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting and kind of very energized podcast episode. So thank you very much for being one of my podcast guests.
Oh, Heather, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ready for More podcast. You can find today's show notes and links at www.igniteyourmarket.com/readyformore. My name is Heather Cameron. I'm your podcast host. And when I'm not hosting this podcast, I'm busy working with entrepreneurial women like you who are ready for more in their business and are looking to get focused on their own unique path to success. You can find more about myself and my programs at www.igniteyourmarket.com. If you like what you heard, feel free to rate, review, and share with your friends. And don't miss an episode by subscribing. Until next time, remember, now is the best time to focus on your more and be inspired by your own unique gifts.